Hello everybody, it's Dale from Stumbling Greenward, and today we have the privilege of interviewing Lydia Hunter. Lydia is the office manager of BC Passive House, and BC Passive House has been in operation for the last 2 years making prefab passive house wall components. She also splits her time between that and Durfeld constructors. And today on the interview, I was so excited to get it started that I actually forgot to start the recording till about 9 minutes in. So the interview is going to start abruptly, but I hope you overlook that and enjoy the content that we did capture. Thanks, and we'll talk to you soon. Enjoy the interview.
So it creates a predictability then? Is that with the modeling? Is that why you like it?
Yes, yeah, exactly. And it looks at everything. So it's looking at your climate. It's looking at the houses and the shading next to you. It's looking at what you're putting into your house. It's looking at how your house is going to be used, or how the building is going to be used. It's very in-depth, and because of that, you have a confidence in the number that is modeled.
And you guys have done a few, and I'm sure you've looked at the performance of the house. Are you finding that they are coming in very close to the performance of the software?
They are, yes. The first project that we were a part of actually had a modeling system set up to monitor how much was being used for heating and cooling. And that was the Austria house. We didn't actually build that. We were just the general contractor for that. But they found that for heating and cooling, and this is a public use building in Whistler, they were spending between $230 and $280 per year for heating, cooling, and hot water. And it was modeling that it was meeting the standard. So,
fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So BC Passive House is, in a sense, an evolution from part of Durfeld. Can you share how Durfeld came to be associated with Passive House and what they were doing prior to that?
Yeah, so Durfeld Constructors is a general contracting company, and we've been based out of Whistler for 40 years. Our start was in log homes, and we have kind of evolved with the tastes of people looking to build homes over the years. So we actually haven't done a log home in 10 to 15 years. And we were introduced to the Passive House standard when we were asked, I think it was in around 2008, to be the general contractor for a Olympic project where the Austrians were looking to build their national house. And historically, the Austrians have used this national house to showcase different things that Austria has to offer, whether it be tourism or different building techniques. And there were 5 private Austrian companies that, when it was announced that the Olympics were going to be the first Green Olympics, decided to use the Austria House to showcase to the world what green building really is, and kind of use that global stage to also showcase their products and demonstrate that the Passive House standard can be built elsewhere. So we were brought in, and we had never heard of the Passive House standard before. And we were mostly just excited to have an Olympic job. But when it really hit home for us, so the majority of the Austria house was actually built in Austria, shipped over, and assembled on site. So we really only looked after site work and finishing, and then helping them with installation. When it really hit home for us was when the house was set up in September and completely locked up. So in November, we were working on finishing the interior, and it was probably -10 outside, and it's around that time that we need to start bringing in heaters to all of our projects. And we had a number of different general contracting projects on the go. And most of them had very large heaters that we were using on the inside to keep our guys comfortable and happy. And the Austria house was being heated with a 1500 watt tiny ceramic heater. And the guys were walking around in t-shirts. And that was when it all kind of came together for us. And like, wow, this does make a difference. This does make sense. And this is the best performance we have ever seen. So after that, Matteo, the owner of the company, throughout the entire building process and prior to starting the construction, they actually went to Europe to do a little bit of a passive house school. But throughout that building process, our guys were also introduced to the passive house standard, and we had buy-in from everyone that worked on the project. And everyone kind of walked away from that saying this is how we should build houses. And as a company, kind of once the dust of the Olympics settled down, we looked at how we can incorporate this into our building practices. The other thing that working on the Austria house convinced us that we needed to do was bring prefabrication into our building practice. This is not a new concept for us. As I mentioned, we did start in log homes, but this was a different approach and something that made instant sense to us, especially in the climate that we tend to build in, which is rainy, snowy. So we kind of stepped back, worked with a number of different people, both in Europe and in Canada, to design a panelized system, looking to design something that would work with Canadian code, was built out of Canadian materials where possible, that was affordable, and that would work really well for panelization. Once we had finished that, no one was actually banging on our door to purchase these panels. So Matteo, the owner of the company, developed a project, the Rainbow Passive House, a duplex, to showcase the panelized system, demonstrate to both ourselves and to the building community that we could meet the standard. So that job actually led to our next job, which led to our next job, which led us to be able to start a new company, BC Passive House, that is strictly for prefabrication of panelized building systems.
Perfect. Okay, so if we back up a little bit, there's just a couple things I want to touch on. If people aren't aware, when you said you were heating the Austria house with a ceramic heater, a 1500 watt heater, those would be like the ones that you could normally buy at your hardware store that you'd put in a room to warm it up on a cold day, right?
Yes, yeah, just a little space heater.
Yeah, so essentially that's got the power of, say, a hair dryer.
Yes.
One hair dryer. And then when you're talking about understanding prefab from the point of view of log homes, if I'm not mistaken, you'd build the log home in your yard and then you'd take it all apart and then deliver it to site. Is that?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, that is exactly how log homes. So the difference with what we're doing now is instead of building in a yard, we are building in a plant outside of the weather, which makes a big difference too. And obviously building a system that is airtight and super insulated. Log homes tend not to fall into that category.
No, true, but I can't imagine that it's exactly like Lincoln logs. You just sort of stack them together once you get to site either. I'm sure there's some level of planning you guys had already ingrained in your process.
Yes, yeah, of course. Yeah. So
then can you clarify when you talk about prefab or prefabrication, what it is and how it might differ from, I know there's a lot of terminology with manufactured housing and things.
Yes.
How that's different from a double wide trailer or that sort of thing. If you could just expand on what prefab is in your context.
So in our context, we are looking at just providing your envelope, essentially, in middle floors and shear walls, whatever makes sense for the assembly on site. So there, as you mentioned, there are different levels of prefabrication. So we focus on panels versus a modular, and in modular there are, again, different levels as well. For us, our expertise is building. We bring in other people for electrical, plumbing, and those kind of things, which you need to do if you are doing a full modular setup. But also for us, it made sense to ship panels because you can put them tightly onto a truck and you're not shipping air. Now, with that being said, there are instances where it does make complete sense to send a full modular unit, but for us and where our focus was, we are just doing panels. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So they're all designed then when you get them, or you build them in the factory, and then they're built. I guess they must be restricted by the width of the truck to get them out, but they all sit together or snap together, kind of Lego once they're on site.
Yeah, that's exactly how it is. So we have a plus and minus system on our panels. So on site, they do just snap together just like Lego. The panels are designed off of the architectural and engineer drawings. So we are a custom shop, and we can build panels to any design you give us. And again, we would argue there's often this idea that prefabrication is cheap and of less quality than site built, but we would argue that the quality that we can achieve in the plant, working on horizontal surfaces out of the weather with access to whatever tools we want, allows us to have greater quality control. Our precision is to the millimeter. And so when we get the design from the architect, we create shop drawings from that. We start with a 3D drawing, and then that gets broken up into individual panel drawings for the work on the floor. And the panels are designed to maximize efficiency in building, on-site installation, as well as trucking. So there's quite a few things that go into where we split our panels and how we break the house up. We are limited by what we can ship. So I think typically it depends on the route, but you're looking at approximately 40 feet in length and 10 to 12 feet in height for the panels.
Okay. So you wouldn't necessarily, they're not like when I think of tilt buildings for concrete, they're generally narrow and tall, but I guess you have the opportunity to do either for whatever suits the building.
Exactly. Yes.
And then would your panelized systems also include roof and floor, or is it only a wall system?
It depends. Always we include the roof. It depends on what we're tying into on site. So again, we look at what makes the most sense for your on-site installation. So if we're tying into a slab on grade where they're insulating that envelope, we will bring in wall panels. And then if there are multiple floors, we will also bring in the floor panels and any shear walls that are required for setup, and then the roof panels. If your passive house envelope starts with our floor panel, then we will provide a full super insulated, airtight floor package as well.
Perfect. Okay, so I know you've kind of alluded to it, but maybe you can just explain the benefits of prefab with the context of passive house, because I'm sure you can build prefab you guys could panelize for conventional construction as well. But how is it that prefab makes a really good fit for passive house?
The precision. And again, with the system that we've used, we have also looked to be conscious of the materials that we are putting into our walls. So we have a wood-based system that we use either blown cellulose insulation or sometimes rock wool, depending on the size of the studs that we're using. But the precision, so we're able to get everything to fit super tight on site. Again, we're working to the millimeters. So when you're looking to create that airtight barrier, everything is fitting together like a glove. And then just overall, the working out of the weather, you're more efficient, you have better quality control, your materials aren't being exposed to the weather, so you're not getting that swelling or mold that can develop if you're out in the rain or snow. And the access to tools. So when we design the panels, when we order the wood, and this is, I guess, ties into if you're looking at reducing your energy footprint, you're probably also looking at reducing any other impact that you might have. So when we order our materials, our drawing system allows us to optimize our wood order. So we reduce our waste to like below between 3 and 5%. And then again, with our material choice, we're looking to reduce the impact of petroleum-based materials, looking at choosing materials that can be recycled at the end of their life, that have low embodied energy and things like that.
Okay, cool. All right, so then you had mentioned that at the end of the Austria House project that your crews had buy-in, and I'm just curious what it was about the process, because to me it would occur that if you had on-site construction laborers, it would almost look like a threat to their job, where they're used to going out to site and banging studs together and building the home. So maybe you can explain, some of the benefits that they see and how that came about for them.
I guess for us, it's a tiny bit different because we were then building the panels as well. But yes, this is something that we deal with a lot of general contractors. The framing is a small percentage of the amount of work that needs to be done in a house. So when we bring our panel packages to site, we aren't actually taking that much away from the carpenters on site. The other thing, I guess, so we typically build or work in the high-end level of home in Whistler. And our carpenters are very conscious of a level of quality that needs to be achieved for these projects. And what hit home for them, and also different trades that we've worked with, is the quality that comes in with the prefabrication. So you have completely straight walls. When the drywaller is coming in, he's not trying to make a 90-degree angle. He's not trying to fix the wall to make it straight. It is straight. So everything that is done afterwards is easier when you're framing your doors. Everything is straight, level. The corners are perfect. So everyone's job is easier and the quality is there, and you can that hit home for them. And then also just being able to experience being inside and not having those drafts and not being cold, and seeing that it can be heated by a small little ceramic heater. For anyone that has lived in a old Whistler house, that that speaks volumes. And I was talking to you about this yesterday. One of our project managers who has just finished his first passive house. So when we first got into this, he was working on kind of a heavy timber project that took up a big chunk of his time. So he was a little bit separated from our passive house journey. But they have been doing the finishing work on this project. And we're into November in Whistler, and the temperature has gone down. And he came in the other day and he was just blown away and just raving about how amazing this is. They haven't turned the heat on in the house yet. It's still comfortable. He thought that we were crazy to be putting a tile floor in without heating underneath. He thought it was going to be cold and uncomfortable, and he was completely sold. So, yeah, does that answer?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I just want to see where I'm going next. So for people that are looking to build houses and they might be considering prefab, is there a particular type of home that it's more suited to, or can you guys do any shape, size?
Well, I guess with the passive house, there's obviously a shape and design that works best for that. With us, we can build anything. You give us a design, we can create it in the shop. If you are trying to build a house if you are conscious of your budget, this would be similar to a site-built house as well. You want to think within the box. If you can reduce corners and diagonals and other things like that, you will have a more efficient build and therefore reduce your cost. So, yeah.
And can you speak generally on site build versus, I don't necessarily want to talk dollars. I know we talk about how it's all very localized and depends on so many aspects. So I'm not looking for a per square foot or anything, but is there sort of a percentage comparison that you guys operate on that what prefab versus conventional might be for construction?
That's a really tricky question for us because we are building something different from what is usually built on site.
So it's not only passive, or it's not just that it's prefab over conventional, it's also passive house.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a vapor diffusion open system. We obviously have a thicker wall, so we have thicker studs. We're using more insulation. We have a wood fiber diffusion board on the exterior. We are investing in tapes to create that airtight barrier. So I guess what we have found, if we're looking at standard built, just to code site built, we would probably be looking at a 15 to 20% increase just over the framing. But that is a small portion of your entire build. So if you were to look at that, including everything in your build, that number is obviously smaller. But if we're comparing just that code built, site built, mass production framing, we are probably at that 15 to 20% more.
Yeah, and like you said, we just went through the construction ourselves. I don't necessarily have all the numbers laid out, but I think the framing portion of it was like less than a third of our total borne costs.
Yeah.
For construction. So 15 or 20% of that to get that much more over conventional construction. Yeah, it doesn't really, I would agree that it's not that big of a bump.
No, and we have found, so if you're looking at the entry level housing where you're trying to do everything for as cheap as possible to build to a passive house standard, there has to be an increase in price. But when you're looking at that middle to high end level of the build, that's where you start to see the savings that investing in your envelope gives you. So you're able to start taking money out of your mechanical room, and on mid to higher end homes, you're already putting in better windows. You're already putting in an HRV. So those differences are less. And at some point, it actually becomes cheaper to build a passive house because your mechanical rooms are expensive. And if you can take money out of that, you start to see the savings. And when you're putting money into your windows and your insulation and your air tightness, those are things that don't require a lot of maintenance. It's kind of a one-time cost that should last the length of your building.
Yeah, it was something I'd remarked about earlier this morning. For me, actually, Durfeld has a part in my passive house story because I got to visit the Whistler house as it was under construction. And really, that's when the light bulb came on for me, because you don't see anybody in Home Depot 5 minutes before it closes going, oh my God, I got to buy some insulation because my house is cold. Like, your insulation never breaks. And so, yeah, it's one of those those costs that stand the test of time. It's not like something you have to replace.
We like to call the passive house, building to the passive house standard, the invisible luxury. And we talked about this yesterday. So I came into the company after the Olympics. So they had already decided they were going to go to a passive house. And I did a little trip around Europe, and everyone I talked to over there was like, yeah, the energy efficiency, that's great. But really it's about the comfort and the livability of the house. And I was like, okay, yes, how comfortable can this really be? But it is, and it's really hard to explain without actually experiencing it. But I had the opportunity to live in the Rainbow Duplex, our first project, for 3 years. And it is about the comfort. Your temperatures are consistent. You don't get those cold drafts by windows. The soundproofing is amazing. The neighborhood that project was built in is a new neighborhood, so there's constantly construction going on, and you can forget about it when you're in the house until you open up a window and you're like, oh, right. That is how we actually sell it now, especially in Canada where energy is practically free. So the big difference is the comfort.
Yeah, and I think you're right about it being invisible. That was part of the reason that I wanted to do interviews today as opposed to opening up my house, because we've talked about it before. If you bring people in and they didn't know necessarily anything about passive house, unless they stayed for an extended period of time, they wouldn't see anything that made your house stand out necessarily. Yeah,
nothing. I guess when you open the windows, you notice something different. But yes, everything is hidden in the walls.
Yeah, and the HRV is in the mechanical room where it's quiet.
Yeah.
And you don't see it going on. But maybe just while we're there, you can expand on it. I know I spoke to Susan Bernhardt a couple days ago about living in a passive house. They've been in theirs for 2 years. You said you were in yours for 3 years.
Yeah.
But you've recently moved out based on other stuff. Can you explain the things that you miss? Like what's become so apparent?
I was lucky enough to move into a place that has in-floor heat. We did have to move because we needed more space and an extra room, but I miss the windows, so we're cold by our window. When you sit by our windows, you can feel your heat traveling to the windows. We have plugs in our exterior walls that blow cold air through them. Sound, we can hear everything, which we live in an apartment, so we hear all of our neighbors. Those are things I miss. Things that I guess really hit home for us living in the house. We had a Mitsubishi heat pump for heating and cooling in our unit. And we also had mini baseboard heaters that we had to put in that we never turned on. And we only used heat from maybe middle to end of November until beginning of February. And that's just because at that time we don't get the solar gain, that the sun is not out long enough to give us the heat to keep it up to 20 degrees. But when we would leave in the winter, and we would leave for a week and a half, we wouldn't leave the heat on. And we would come home and the house would still be at 16 to 18 degrees after a week of no one living in there, cooking, heating stuff up that way. It would be the middle of winter, so Whistler's often socked in with cloud. And we can't do that now. So that's a big difference. The other thing that we found very interesting is the cold, clear days. So you would expect your house to be colder at -20 than you would at -10. But often at -10 in Whistler, we're socked in and cloudy. And at -20, it's clear. So on those days, our house was warm, enjoyable, and we wouldn't have the heat on. So it's interesting.
Nice. Yeah, well, hopefully you can find your way back into one soon.
Hopefully, yeah.
Now that we're in, I don't know. It would take for me to move out of one. But so before I open it up to questions to the floor, is there anything in the lessons learned category that Durfeld and BC Passive House have learned along the way, or wish that they could have done over that they're taking forward?
Things that we have learned, and this is true for prefabrication and for passive house, really for any house design, but especially true for prefabrication and passive house. You want an integrated design approach. You need to have everyone on board. And if you're an architect or an engineer, the people building the house have valuable things to say. And especially with prefabrication, if we get a chance to be a part of those initial meetings, maybe after the first design sketch is done, we're able to offer input on ways to make the construction side of it more efficient. You also want to have your trades involved. So your mechanical, your electrical, your plumbing. That's very important, especially with prefabrication, because you need to have an idea of where this is going before you create the panels. Another lesson that we have learned, having worked in Whistler for 40 years, we have a really great relationship with the building department here. And we had the benefit of the building inspectors being through the passive house standard with the Austria House process. So a couple of them actually went to Austria prior to the construction and went through passive house school. So they have been really great to work with and sit down with us, and are able to we're usually able to find solutions to what we want to do. With the prefabrication, we have done a lot of work outside of Whistler, and whenever you're doing something new, whether that's a panelized system or bringing in new products or a new design approach, get your building officials on side right away. Go in, start talking to them, develop a working relationship with them. It helps. It makes the process a lot easier and enjoyable for everyone.
Yeah, I think the work on the front end is a great tip. There's no sense trying to hide what you're up to and then trying to figure out how to fit it in later.
Yes.
So before I ask if anybody's got questions, by all means, if you can put them in the chat box. But Lydia, if people want more information for BC Passive House, maybe you could explain how or where your service area is, like how far you guys would wrap up panels and send them or erect them, and then if you give your website so that they can find out more information.
We will ship anywhere. They've been designed to fit on a truck or in a shipping container, and they'll go 10 kilometers, they'll go thousands of kilometers. We are just in the process of updating our website. Hopefully that will come out in the next couple of months. But for more information and to look at the system that we have gone with, you can go to our website, which is www.bcpassivehouse.com. Because that's I think one great thing about the Passive House Standard is that they don't tell you how to do it, they just tell you what you have to achieve. So there are endless possibilities for how you can create your build-ups. Yeah.
And do you guys, if someone was new to it completely, do you guys do in-house architectural as well, or do you have partners that you deal with?
No, we don't have anyone in-house doing design. So we will work with your architect. And we've worked with a number of architects that have not built passive houses before, and we have done consultation on that.
Perfect. So if somebody came to you, you'd be able to help steer them if they were looking for somebody to design the home of their dreams. And
yes, yeah, definitely.
Visible comfort.
Yeah.
And your nonpartisan shop as far as working with windows and other parts of systems?
Yeah, we can supply windows if you want, but we will work with whatever heating, mechanical you want to use. I mean, with windows, if you're going to invest this much into creating a system that is super insulated and airtight, you're obviously going to want to put good windows in. So we would advise on different types of windows to use, but yes, we will work with anything, and we'll work with any architect, we'll work with any builder. Yeah, I guess I should say we work with, you know what, I'm going to rephrase that. We want to work with builders that are on the same page and want to finish the house to the standard that it has been designed to. So obviously you want to have trades on site that are trying to achieve the same thing that you are.
Yeah, I designed for a successful project. I get it, absolutely. Yeah. Perfect. All right. There, Cameron. Welcome, Cameron. At what stage of the design would you typically get involved? Would you get involved once I've completed my final design and done all my PHPP calculations?
We actually want to get involved before you complete your final design. Actually, if you have your initial design idea and sketch, it's great to have, especially with prefabrication, to have the builders look at it and say, you know what, if you change this, it would make it a lot easier and more efficient. So in our ideal world, we like that initial conversation to be at the beginning. And we would also provide you with information, I guess, for your PHPP calculations. If you were using our, I'm reading the questions at the same time, sorry. Yes, it would be, because we have standard details.
I just want to stop you for a sec, Lydia. This will show up in audio later, so if we read the question before you answer the next one, then it'll help. So would it be good to have you involved in the detailing aspects?
Yes. So we have a system that we use. We change the depth and a few of the features of the panel depending on the build, but we have standard details and we have a system. So if you were planning on using this, it makes sense to have us involved at that level, because then it saves you having to redetail things later.
Awesome. All right. Are there any other questions? It's been great. You're drawing a crowd, Lydia.
There's another question. Are there upfront costs to have you involved? I'm not. What do you mean by that? Do you mean pay for our consulting, or?
Let's assume maybe, do you give some details, like as far as maybe the values of your standard panels and stuff to start detailing, or pass along any of those details, or is that a hired service that you guys provide?
No, we will, I'm thinking as a quotation process. We will provide information at that design stage that is not charged for or not billed for. Obviously, if we are doing a above and beyond kind of initial consultations and quick discussions, then if we're being brought in at an involved level, then yes, we would have to look at billing, but typically we do not bill for that.
Perfect. And then Donald asks if you ship to Europe. I think you mentioned that you can size them to get them in shipping containers and stuff. So
yes, yeah, we can ship everywhere. I mean, in Europe, there's a lot of companies doing very similar things to what we're doing. So I don't know if Europe necessarily makes the most sense, but we would ship to Europe, yes.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I think we are just about at time. So was there anything else that you wanted to talk about that we didn't cover today, Lydia?
I don't think so. I didn't really go into the detail of what our system is, but if you guys are interested, you can check it out on the website, and maybe come back in a couple of months and check out our new, more detailed website with a bit more information on some of the projects that we have worked on.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Lydia.
You're welcome.
Look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Stumbling Greenward podcast. You can access links to all the resources that were mentioned in this podcast at stumblinggreenward.com/podcast and clicking on this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, I recommend you check out some of the other podcasts, including jargon-free interviews on Windows, multi-unit construction, passive house development, and much more. Before you go, I'd be eternally grateful if you were to share this interview with others, and be sure to click subscribe on iTunes. Thanks, and have a great day.